Good afternoon and welcome to the December 13th edition of the Gold Goats and Gun Short News. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. And today I want to talk about President Bolton, because we don't have Donald Trump as president anymore. It's John Bolton who's president. Bolton is the one who's setting all the major policies. Bolton is the one deciding who Trump gets to speak to and who Trump doesn't get to speak to. He's the one out there stating all of the unpleasant things that the Trump administration is going to do, because Trump doesn't want to be left on the hook for it. What am I talking about? There's a lot of stuff going on here. In the last couple of days, Bolton has really put his imprimatur on everything that has to do with foreign policy. Donald Trump is no longer in charge of foreign policy. He hasn't been for quite a long time. And it's really obvious. And that's just the way it is. And so let's go over it. So at a speech at the Heritage Foundation recently, yesterday or the day before, John Bolton outlined his plan for how we're going to counter Chinese and Russian malign influence in Africa. Now, it's no secret that the Chinese have a tremendous amount of money invested in Africa because, of course, Africa is a massive source of mineral and raw material wealth, right? Unlike the colonial powers of the European descent, Chinese actually, though Bolton, you would never hear this coming from Bolton's mouth, the Chinese mechanism for colonization is far, far different. It's not nearly as extractive, though. To listen to Bolton talk about it, and I want to read you the quote directly from his speech that's been quoted in Reuters and a variety of other places. So China uses bribes, opaque agreements, and the strategic use of debt to hold states in Africa captive to Beijing's wishes and demands. Its investment ventures are riddled with corruption and do not meet the same environmental or ethical standards as U.S. development projects. Does John Bolton not know about the World Bank? Does John Bolton not know about the IMF? These are the tools of institutional destruction used by the United States and Europe since World War II to destroy and keep poor Central and South America, Africa, most of the Asian continent. It's been part of the entire doctrine. Now he's accusing China of that? Apparently, his nose did not grow 3 times its normal size while he stated this. I think that was reported by CNN. So, take this one step further. What are we going to do? So what's our plan in Africa? We only have 7,200 troops stationed in Africa, FYI. Not a lot. We have more than that in Syria. We're going to draw down a bunch of our troops. I don't know, maybe 10 or 15% of them in the short term, of course, because every time there's a small troop drawdown and then we try to pour money into the situation, we wind up having to pour troops back into the situation later. Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen. Doesn't matter where we go. Troops always start small. We throw a bunch of money in. Nothing has changed with these guys. Nothing has changed. Okay? They created the Mujahideen in the 1980s. They became Al-Qaeda. They blew up, who then turned around, with the Saudi Arabians' help, our supposed allies, and then blew up the World Trade Centers on 9/11. We're fighting them in Iraq. We're fighting them. All these people that we're fighting in Iraq and Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and around the world, guess what? All people that we funded to fight the Soviets back in the 70s and the 80s. Well, here we are. It's 2018, almost 2019, and John Bolton hasn't learned a damn thing. And yet, here he is, acting as president. So has anything changed? Now remember, Donald Trump outlined his overall foreign policy strategy, his America First foreign policy strategy, last year. And it went under the radar. Nobody wants to talk about it because everybody's like starry-eyed, rose-colored glasses, the whole 9 yards about MAGA bitches and all this stuff. It has nothing to do with that. It's called energy dominance. What Trump wants to do is to pull back on the physical empire, the military empire. That's what he wants to do. And use full-spectrum dominance of financial leverage that we have to make America great again, to keep the empire in place for America's interests while bringing the military home, which would work, maybe, if it wasn't so ham-fistedly obvious that that's what they're trying to do, and they're not achieving. See, because Trump overestimates the value of our dominance. But in this respect, our financial dominance around the world is significant, but it's also our Achilles heel. And he doesn't understand this because Donald Trump has a 17th century view of trade, which I've talked about before. But before I get too far off the field, let's remember, so that if energy dominance is the policy, bring the physical empire home, leave the financial empire in place, then that makes perfect sense when we look at why the United States is so desperate to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in Europe. What are we trying to do in Africa? We're going to pull the troops home, and we're going to pour money into, they might as well be the Mujahideen al-Kaq in Iran. They might as well be Boko Haram. They might as well be the Free Syrian Army. They might as well be all those people because they're exactly the same people. In the end, they want to be exactly the same people. We're going to fund them to take over and be our puppet regimes to counter Chinese and Russian influences. This is all standard Cold War stuff. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. While Bolton tries to sell the world that we're the least onerous colonial power in human history. There's a word for John Bolton called chutzpah. And since he's an Iranian agent, since he's an Israeli agent as well, it kind of fits. All right, so Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the EU Parliament just threw down a non-binding condemnation of it because, of course, enough of them are in the pay of George Soros and the rest of the globalists who are also behind all this crazy shit. We're able to push that through. Congress did the same thing the other day, asking the president to invoke CATSA, the Countering Americans' Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, the follow-up and the more stringent follow-up to the Magnitsky Act, simply because, well, we don't like Russian oil pipelines. So therefore, we have the right to sanction the world and sanction everybody's banks and sanction countries and individuals and anybody we think this. Do you see the thing? Energy dominance. So what also got it announced this week? A massive find in the Permian Basin. Massive basin. For those of you who don't know, the Permian Basin, like along with Eagle Ford and Marcellus and a variety of other shale plays around the country, one of the biggest producers of oil. This is where all of our oil is coming. There's a massive find in the Permian Basin. Trump wants lower interest rates. He wants a weaker dollar. Why? Because he wants to be able to fund that expansion, even further expansion of American oil production, which is already ludicrously high, and send it skyrocketing in order to be able to, one, produce the marginal barrel of oil in the world, and two, keep the entire world on the petrodollar. Not really going to work. But he wants to keep the Saudis as his friends. How are you going to do all those things? How are you going to square that circle unless you're just going to use the Saudis for a few years and then throw them overboard? Which is probably what we're thinking. So I just find it really funny that Mr. I Hate Globalists, who fired globalist Gary Cohn, effectively, from his cabinet, is going along with every globalist imperial demand of the ultimate arch neoconservative globalist John Bolton. And people still think this guy is their president. They're still fighting for him. I mean, the stunt he pulled with Schumer and Pelosi the other day over the wall was cute. It was fun. But it doesn't mean anything. Meanwhile, the national debt spiked up towards $22 trillion with actual debt-based liabilities of somewhere close to 42 or 44 trillion, depending on how you do the accounting. And that's not even counting the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare. And on the other side of this, I see the Russians with a 5-year high in balance of trade. Now, a lot of that is because of higher oil prices. National debt that's now below their total national debt that's below their Forex reserve. And that's less than $500 billion, by the way. Sitting there going, we have the cheapest gas in the world and the Europeans want it. But yet, we're going to force the world to accept our empire on Trump's new terms. And these terms are insane. Oh, by the way, Iran is about ready to sign a free trade agreement with the European Economic Union. Putting it out there. Something to think about and something to look at in the long term. So ultimately, what does this all boil down to? Nothing has changed. Trump's policy of energy dominance is what we're seeing in foreign policy. And John Bolton is out there to sell those parts of it without attaching it directly to Trump and leaving the plausible deniability on Trump's part that he's actually not going along with all of this disgusting Russia baiting and all of this other stuff. I mean, he's been against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from the beginning because he wants to sell overpriced natural gas and have energy dominance. Not going to work. There's anything we learned this week, looking at Theresa May and Brexit and Italian debt negotiations and what's going on in France and the pending forced merger of Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank in Germany, is that Germany is still firmly in control of the European Union. That means the European Parliament doesn't have any power, and this condemnation doesn't mean anything. By the way, you know why all this is happening right now? Because next week, pipe starts being laid for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This has been the Gold, Goats, and Guns short news for December 13th, 2018. If you liked what you heard today, please give a like and subscribe down below. That'd be great. You can also follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. And you can support my work at Patreon at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns. There's links to all of that in the video description down below. Tomorrow night, Friday night, live stream, 8:30. I don't know what the topic is because I don't usually pick it until it's 5 minutes before we go live. So you guys have a great afternoon. You take care. Keep your stick on the ice.